Good afternoon and welcome to the World Leaders Forum. I want to thank the Institute of African Studies for co-sponsoring this event today, and Professor Suleiman Bashir Dan for moderating the question and answer session that will occur at the end of this program. This is a great opportunity, the World Leaders Forum and our guest today, for all of us to try to think, understand better the challenges around the world. We see these challenges in a damaged economy and a dysfunctional financial system in many ways, which has created deep layers of instability that will require years of recovery. We see the challenges of globalization that has improved millions of lives, but also sharply increased the income gap between the wealthy and almost everyone else. And we see these challenges in the remarkable communications and technology revolutions that have at once made our world so small that we can readily reach across vast distances. And we see these challenges in a world that faces profound threats to sustainable development due to climate change and environmental degradation. Today we will be hearing from one of our great world leaders, Nobel laureate, Her Excellency, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, President of the Republic of Liberia. Madam Johnson Sirleaf, we all welcome you here to New York and to Columbia University. Liberia's fierce challenges are perhaps more daunting than most. It is a nation still recovering from decades of brutal civil wars that decimated the population and the economy. It is a nation with rich natural resources that have too often provided, as they have in so many countries, opportunities for exploitation rather than for growth and opportunities for all citizens. To these challenges, President Johnson Sirleaf, now in her second term, brings her remarkable personal attributes and career experiences. A student of economics and accounting, she studied in both Africa and here in the United States, where she earned a master's in public administration from Harvard's Kennedy School. She served as her nation's Minister of Finance more than 3 decades ago, before pursuing an accomplished career in both the private sector and as a senior official at the World Bank. During the period of dictatorship and civil war, she was forced into exile in the Ivory Coast, later returning to Liberia to lead the nation's Governance Reform Commission. With her victory in the 2005 democratic elections, the President became the first elected female head of state in Africa. Her agenda in office has included securing forgiveness for billions of dollars of Liberian debt, signing into law a Freedom of Information Bill, the first of its kind in West Africa, and establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate and address the continuing consequences from decades of civil strife, and populating her cabinet with a significant number of women. While it has not been an easy path, Liberia has also seen increasing economic growth from foreign investments and improving trade, and from its role as the second largest maritime licensor in the world. This week at the UN General Assembly, she is joining the President of Indonesia and the Prime Minister of Britain on a panel that has been convened to set up the post-2015 International Development Agenda to follow the current Millennium Development Goals. The Nobel Prize Committee recognized her lifetime of courageous accomplishments when they awarded her the Peace Prize this past year. For nonviolent struggle, for the safety of women, and for women's rights to full participation in peace, nation-building work. It is, therefore, a special honor for us to welcome to Columbia Her Excellency, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, President of the Republic of Liberia.
President Bollinger, members of the Board of Trustees, faculty, administrators, students, distinguished guests, my compatriots here, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to know that the reputation of colloquial school sessions like this precede you. The activisms that you show in these meetings we're very well aware of, so I'm looking forward to that interactive session once I've completed my statement. Let me first introduce to you those who are with me. They're part of our delegation. Our senior senator, Jewel Howard Taylor. Our Minister of Justice, Christiana Tarr. Minister of Planning and Finance, Amara Coney. Chief of Protocol, David Anderson. Director of Communication, Shirley Brownell. Minister of Education, Ethel. The Minister of Information, Culture, Affairs, and Tourism, and the Deputy Protocol Officer. Right back of them, as an Assistant Minister of Information, as the Press Secretary, those are independent press people. We bring you greetings from the government and people of Liberia, and I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to be here. Had you invited me to speak about Liberia less than a decade ago, our discussion would have centered on what is today described as a failed state. As recently as 2003, our country was the poster child of failed statehood, having reached the point where Liberians traveling abroad were ashamed to carry our passport. Today, thanks to the resilience of our people, their hard work, and our commitment to move forward, Liberia has turned the corner. To get to where we were today, we received much appreciated support from the international community, enabling us to embark upon the transformative agenda that is now underway. Looking at our own recent history, the topic of the conversation today is how do you move from a failed state to a fragile state, and from a fragile state to a competitive state in the process of transformation. As you well know, a failed state is one where governing mechanisms which provide the well-being of the people have broken down. The security apparatus meant to protect them is dysfunctional. The economy is at the mercy of predators, and social services have crumbled. That's where we were. The transformative process for Liberia started with the Accra Peace Accord in 2003. We had then 3 years of a transition period of mixed results, successful in maintaining the peace, in starting the operation of institutions, but hardly moving the country much further because of the interplay of those that were part of the transition representing those that came from different factions, all having to collaborate to be able to move toward a modern state. From the transition, when this administration came into power in January 2006, we started what we call the period of stabilization. And one of the key things we did was to establish 4 pillars under the poverty reduction strategy. The pillars were peace, stability, economic reconstruction, governance and the rule of law, infrastructure, and basic services. Under the peace and security sector, we had to deal with an army that largely comprised people from different warring factions. And so it meant disbanding the entire army, starting all over, setting admission criteria which would allow only those with a certain level of education. With the support of the US, that process has now produced 2,000 well-trained, professional new army. It also meant the rest of the security sector, such as the police, the immigration and others, putting them through rigid training programs to enable them to prepare themselves to protect the security of the state. At the same time, we had a peacekeeping force, a UN peacekeeping force, one of the highest in the world at the time, 14,000. Today, down to 7,000, and in a period of drawdown, which within 3 to 5 years will see them depart. And at that time, hopefully, we're in a position and have the capacity to take it over ourselves. Under economic revitalization, being a resource-rich country, natural resource-rich country, with mining, agriculture, forestry, fishing potential, we went for mobilizing private capital, our own resources being limited. We were able to mobilize some 16 billion in foreign direct investment in all of these sectors, operations which are just getting started with the results to be seen. Putting our fiscal regime in order, ensuring that we subscribed to a balanced budget, a cash-based budget, so that we would not have these huge fiscal deficits and the results that they bring in inflation. We entered the HIPIC program. And under the HIPIC program, we were able, in what we call a record time of about 3 years, to cancel essentially a 4.9 billion external debt that had not been served for 20 years. Making sure that We then opened up the economy, required the infrastructure that it takes to make them move. And so schools, clinics, roads, electricity, water system, all of those things lacking in terms of public service were things that we got started. Institutions, governance and the rule of law, just building those basic institutions with the capacity constraint that was faced, getting those dysfunctional institutions working again. Some of the things we had to do: law reform. Over the years, duplicative laws, complicated laws, laws that required amendments, repeals to bring them to current conditions were things that we had to do. As I mentioned, institutional development. The capacity issue, because most of those trained had left the country over the years. The brain drain had affected these institutions. As a matter of fact, the concentration of power in the center, the concentration, the presidency that was so domineering that we had to build the institutions so that you could be able to move some of that power and decision-making away from the center, which was ruling by fiat, ruling by discretion. The pillars of integrity. That meant strengthening our governance, our auditing commission, General Auditing Commission, which we moved to do, creating an anti-corruption commission. We subscribed to the extractive industry transparency initiative, and I'm proud to say that we were one of the first African countries to become compliant under that. Just developing policies, formulating the strategy and policies in all of our sector that would guide us toward our agenda. Rebuilding our relationships with our neighbor. As you know, in those years of war, Liberia was the epicenter of a regional war. And so mending fences with our neighbors became very important. Renewing, getting our bilateral and multilateral institutions and relationships back so that we could, having solved the debt problem, having built the institutions, having set the policies, we had access to the normal facilities that countries would have. Our diplomatic relations, our international relationship with international organizations, all broken down over those years, meant fixing those. At the end of the 6 years, we conclude that our stabilization period is in place. Liberia's growth rate over the past 6 years has averaged 6.5%. This year, 2012, the estimates of the IMF is that it will be 8.8%. And that's not enough. We know that, but that's where we are, and our institutions are functioning again, capacity is growing. So now we enter the period that we call truly the transformation period. And what does our transformative agenda consist of? In the first instance, and we give credit to our minister here who led this effort, is to develop a long-term perspective, a development agenda that goes beyond the normal cycle. And so we've already formulated what is called Vision 2030. By the year 2030, this is what we want to achieve. And that particular ultimate goal is to become a middle-income country by that year. To do so means you must also take into account what people in the country want. not a desktop review and formulation of a vision, but because for too long people have been left out of the process of formulating their vision, this requires a 2-year process of robust consultation all over the country, down into the community levels, where one begins to see this also required in formulating this vision, determining what were the root causes of the problems that we face. Why did we generate into wars? Why were we not able to sustain our development, given the fact that we are so natural resource rich? That agenda, that new vision, attempts to go into that and to describe it, and it comes from the people themselves, their own views of what the problem is and what the solutions ought to be. We have now gone from an annual budget cycle to a medium-term expenditure framework. And under that, it enables us to continue to mobilize private capital, private investment, to shift resources from recurrent to investment, because you now have a longer time framework when that investment, you know, there will be sufficient budgetary allocation to be able to complete investment that may cover more than a period of a year. Infrastructure, one of our major constraints, and those basic economic infrastructure that makes a difference in whether you continue to reach your growth targets. Power. Today, the country with 21 megawatts of power, resulting in the cost of electricity at over 50 cents per kilowatt hour. You can imagine, compare that with, say, hydropower, where the cost is about 7 cents per kilowatt hour. You can see the big gap that is. So part of that transformative thing is to rehabilitate our hydro plant, to be able to examine alternative sources of energy, whether it's solar or windmill or biomass, all of those possibilities of trying to do that. Our road system, we're in the rainforest where the capital cost of building roads are so high, and there are only limited period when construction can take place, because for 6 months we have rains. And today, climate change, the effects of climate change are real. We feel it because farming patterns are changing. The rains are excessively heavy. So we have to think of how do we address that, and not forgetting the fact that social infrastructure are also important. Education. For so many years, many of our young people were bypassed by education. Many of them were child soldiers who all they knew was how to destroy, how to kill. Today, as we go into the 10th year of peace, you can see the transformation in there, but you can also see the anxiety in them, sometimes even the anger in them, that they've been bypassed, that they're part of a lost generation. And how does one respond to their needs very quickly before that dissatisfaction turns into? And so education, some of them too old for that, skills training, vocational training, to enable them to have the means whereby they can have a livelihood. And so youth development is part of this new transformative agenda. How do we put them to work? How do we manage their race expectations? How do we transform them into productive, creative, contributing students? I mentioned capacity, and I'll come back to that. There's so many things, so many achievements that could have been much more, but for our own limitations of capacity. We have tremendous support from partners, but we can't let them do it for us completely. Technical assistance, yes. Training, yes. But we've got to be able to do it ourselves, and that means that there will be limitations in the achievement, in the success, in the results, as we begin, our own people begin to learn to take on the responsibilities of getting things done. So we have lots of special programs to deal with the capacity issue. We had support, for example, from the Open Society Initiative, the topping off of salaries for a certain period of time to enable us to repatriate professional, capable Liberians from the diaspora and bring them home to take this responsibility. Getting scholarship programs ourselves, some of it coming from universities like Columbia and others, where we're training people in specialized skills, but at the same time building our own institutions, which is the real answer. Getting that quality education at all levels. We started with the lower levels. We made primary education free. We extended it to middle school, in public schools, free and compulsory. And it's starting to work, but it's still at a level because mothers still send their children to sell on the streets because that's how they survive, or take them to the farms to help them to drive the birds from the rice farms, because that's what they're accustomed to. How do we change all of that? We've got what we call the President's Young Professional Program, bringing the young graduates from the university and putting them under mentoring programs with some of our professionals so that they be able to grow in their professions. All of those are part of the combination of trying to address that. Reconciliation. The many years of starting from our 1980 coup d'etat to the wars and the different warring factions and the different political competitions and strife makes reconciliation a major. How do we reach that, cross that bridge? It's not today. It starts from a cleavage that started from our very beginnings, when you had emancipated slaves go back to our country and met with indigenous population and refused to give them the same kind of equality. And so that cleavage, that bridge that started way there, has never really been resolved, and it came to the place where it manifested itself in a coup d'etat. And that coup d'etat itself did not solve it, and so that transformed into a war, and the war brought more factions, more divisions. So we want to tackle that reconciliation. We've been working on a roadmap for that, a roadmap that's going to be validated by the public along with the Vision 2030, early November, when those two documents, having already come from a robust process of consultation with people, will be even validated, we hope, by a larger group of people coming together in what we hope will be a national conference to be able to look at those particular issues. Part of the transformation, judicial reform. Our judicial system patterned after the United States in every way. Most of our laws and our statutes pattern after the United States. Our Constitution, there's going to be constitutional review because they've got certain elements in the Constitution that are totally incompatible with today's requirements. Discriminatory clauses that have been in there. How do we make sure that, with that we can begin to deal with the judiciary? Government rationalization. We've got too big a government, and we've got to be able to slim down the government. The government must do only those things required of government so that the private sector can be placed at the center of our growth agenda. And so that's concessions review. I'm quite sure many of you have read this 16 billion we talk about. A lot of them have brought problems of land reform, because we've given large tracts of land to mining concessions, to agriculture concessions, but it hasn't worked very well because we now have a community rights law in which we say communities have the right to their land, and community rights must be protected. So you have this this contradictory thing that we have to sort out. How do we ensure that we bring in the investment, because the investment brings infrastructure development, the investment brings job, the investment brings per capita income increases, but at the same time, make sure that the rights of the community is protected so that their farming system are in place. The oil sector. I'm sure many people know that Liberia today prospecting for oil. We won't see a drop of oil in my administration, thank God, so I won't have to deal with that. But if we do not take the measures that protect future generations, then we stand a chance that Liberia too become a nation with a resource curse. And so we must make sure that we put in the structures, the laws, the systems. We must use the example of other countries that have done it well, that have made sure that these resources indeed translate into programs that benefit the majority of the people and that they are secured for future generations. The same applies to our forestry sector. And so. And finally, how do we change the mindset? I call it value system reordering. That, I think, is the most difficult part of all. Young people, old people, subjected to deprivation for a period of 2 decades, who has survived mainly by their wits, any way they could, whether it was a resort to extortion or a resort to violence or a resort to dishonesty. They had to survive. It was a survival mentality. And that affects the mindset of people. How do we change that so that everybody becomes the owner of their own society, the protector of their destiny? That they indeed can determine their fate and know that their country only moves by their participation, by their ownership, by their contribution. That's the biggest of it. The moral rearmament is something that I don't have any answer to. We look to others, the social scientists and others who can help to deal with that. But we still say, with all the challenges, with all the progress, Liberia still remains today a nation of hope. And if there's anything that we've been able to accomplish, is to have given our people hope. Hope for the future. The promise of a better life. The promise that indeed tomorrow they can be what they want to be on the basis of their own industry and their contribution. We are determined that in 10 years, Liberia will not have to take foreign aid, that we can do it on the basis of our resources. We are determined, when I talk about a 2030 vision, that come the year 2030, we will be a middle-income country. That's our commitment to our people. That's our people's commitment to themselves. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Suleiman Bashir Diagne. I'm a professor in the departments of French and Philosophy, and I'm the acting director of the Institute of African Studies. And it is a great honor for me to be moderator of this Q&A session, as it gives me the opportunity, Your Excellency, to thank you very much for a wonderful talk. And thank you. You have ended your speech on the word hope. We want to thank you on behalf of all the Africanist community, all the many African scholars of Africa here, at Columbia and the Colombian community at large to thank you for representing indeed hope yourself and representing Africa as a continent of hope and not anymore as a basket case. Madam President has indicated how eager she is to engage the Columbia community, in particular our vibrant community of undergraduate students. So you are invited to use these microphones on both aisles, and please line up behind those microphones and ask your questions, allowing the maximum interaction for this session. And do not forget, please, to introduce yourself when you ask your question. So I will start with my right. Please.
Your Excellency, excuse me, Your Excellency, thank you so much for coming here to Columbia University. Myself and 4 other researchers from the School of International Affairs spent this last summer in Liberia, and we really, really enjoyed your beautiful country and its great people, so thank you. So we did a lot of research on the forestry sector and how that impacts governance. And as you're aware of, I know there's a lot of problems with that. So my question to you, Your Excellency, is how do you see this transition until communities actually, in the rural communities, actually become empowered? Because we know at this point the companies that are operating are pretty shady companies that would not be operating in most of the world. I do understand the need to collect revenues and to attract investment, but how do you get to that point where you can actually have a rural community that is being treated responsibly by companies? I understand that there's a gap, there's a bridge to be crossed to get to that point, but how do you get to that point? Thank you.
Very well. Maybe I should take a couple. Answer one by one.
It's up to you, Madam President. Yes, please.
All right. Okay, let me deal with this one because then somebody else may not ask that or carry that forward. I can deal with it. You no doubt referring to the recent Global Witness report that has to do with what is called the private use permit in our forestry sector. This is what happens when a good intent gets turned around. We gave concessions because we have forestry in public land where we know that we have to preserve it. So we have a forestry law that has to do with commercialization, conservation, and community benefits. We also passed a community benefit law in which those communities that have forests in their areas can benefit by having logging operations but do not have to meet the taxing and other requirements, thereby enabling them to use the resources to build their communities. But where we both went wrong was that we did not build the capacity in the communities for them to understand those rights properly and to be able to protect themselves. So some of the major large companies who had to operate it for them simply compromised some of the local leaders, took large tracts of their forest land, gave them small compensation in return, and thereby bypassed the regulations which was meant for use of the communities. Also tax evasion, because we did not subject it. And so we now have to review the whole forestry sector, the concessions that were given, to see if somebody has willfully compromised our community leaders, willfully bypass our laws, in which case action will have to be taken. I don't know what course of action, whether it's whether it's concession cancellation or concession revision or renegotiations, that will have to be determined from the findings of an independent group that has been established to look into that problem. Now, are these companies, what do you call them? Shady companies? So Global Witness says, but when we negotiated those concessions, we used the international law group, a group of lawyers from this country, to work with us to make sure that they would help. But if they are shaded, we'll unshade them.
Thank you. I now move to the next question, please.
Hello, my name is Karina Jugla. I'm studying human rights here at Columbia. And Madam President Sirleaf, I would really like to thank you for taking the time to address us here at Columbia today. And I would like to ask what steps Liberia is taking to advance education for girls.
Okay. Maybe I'll take two more.
Yes, indeed. Go ahead.
My name is Erin O'Reilly, and I'm a student of development practice at SEPA. I was also lucky enough to conduct research in Liberia last year, working with communities in Grand Cape Mount and Barbaloo County. And I hate to bring it back to concessions, but we were looking at the impact of the Simdarby palm oil plantation on food security and agriculture in those communities. And we had determined that in the areas where the palm oil had already been, or the palm trees had already been planted, there had been a visible impact on the agriculture and the land available to those communities. And we know that the government is working on this issue right now, and that the interagency task force has recognized that perhaps free and prior informed consent and proper surveying of the communities ahead of the development maybe was not conducted in the right manner. My question is now that these things have been determined and the process is moving forward, how will the government work with the communities that are already being touched by the development? Will there be any adjustment of the compensation that they could receive for land that was taken from them, even though they've already received some compensation for the crops that was on that land when the land was taken by the company? And how will the government address the current food insecurity in these communities, because there is no outlet for them, no other land, and no outgrower program provided by the company at the moment?
One more, then we'll get to answers.
Please step forward.
Hi, Julian Hector, engineering class of 2010. And I was able to go to Sierra Leone in 2007. And one of the things that really struck me was that there, similarly to Liberia, there is a lack of electricity. But at the same time, when I was in Freetown, I was on a house overlooking a hill, and there was so much breeze blowing. And it made me think of how in Jamaica we've successfully implemented wind projects. Could you comment on the plausibility of doing something like that in Liberia, possibly using carbon offsets with other nations?
Girls' education. That is a clear priority of our government, recognizing that the world over, girls' education have not been given the priority like boys, particularly in poor nations. When household income is not sufficient, the boys get the first chance of an education and the girls get left behind. And so our enforcement of compulsory primary education in public schools brought a quadrupling of enrollment, and the majority are girls, because they were the ones that were being left behind. Our problem when it comes to girl education is retention. Once they get past primary, into secondary school, then teenage pregnancy, other kinds of diversion from school is where our challenge is, and we're trying to look at what has happened in other places to reduce this. As a matter of fact, I just saw that that's a problem even here today in this country. I was saying, so, we're we're trying to deal with that. But we've done, school lunches, free uniforms. We've tried all of that as a means of encouraging the parents to send their children to school. Even there's an innovative program that has started in one county, cash transfers. Just giving cash transfers, let's say, to grandmothers who take care of their children, and then it's tied to their keeping the kids in school. So it is a priority for us. The Silent Derby experience is a troubling one, and as you correctly pointed out, that matter is being addressed through this interagency task force. If land has to be retrieved or relinquished by Silent Derby to return some of them to the communities, that will be done. We must find a way to balance the protection of the community and giving them their rights for their farming activities to ensure food security, but at the same time making sure that an investment in the greater part of the land that will indeed produce benefits for the community, housing benefits, job benefits, social infrastructure benefits, is finding the right balance. And I think if there's any error we made, it was not to have had the proper communication with the community before, so that they know this is the land, this is what will go toward industrial production, this is what will be retained. So we're trying to correct that after the fact. So you did that study, smell notice?
No, that was another one. Our paper should be coming out shortly.
All right.
Thank you.
Electricity. Well, we're looking at alternative sources of electricity. And the most favored alternative for us, quite frankly, are mini hydros. Liberia is a country full of water bodies, and hydro is still the most economical. Solar lights, we're looking at windmills, our possibility, biomass, all of those. We've got an entity now, Rural Electrification Institution, organization, that is now undertaking the study on alternative sources of energy so that we might be able to apply those as we move from thermal generation. Even with the reconstruction of the hydro, will not have enough electricity for the rural areas, so we have to find alternatives out there. We'll be glad to look at the Jamaica experience.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam President. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to ask you some questions this afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Herdman. I'm a Master's in Development Practice, as well as Erin at SEPA, and I was on the team of 4 that traveled to Liberia in the spring to measure food security in the palm oil area. And as an economist, I'm sure you know that Liberia is food insecure, sensitive, and highly vulnerable to increases in spikes in food and fuel prices, particularly rice, which is Liberia's staple. As Erin mentioned, our findings through our research project on the ground found that the area that was under cultivation had experienced a decrease in food security and an increase in vulnerability in the areas that were under cultivation. And I was wondering what interventions is the government working on to smooth the impact of food prices and shocks expected in the near future, particularly during the duration of the time that the palm oil trees are under gestation, which is for the next 3 to 5 years, and unemployment is much lower than will be over the next couple of years, as well as the increase to migration for the area for people looking for jobs, which creates a higher demand on food prices, which again enhances the shock of increases on food prices. And sorry, one last bit. So considering that Liberia is food insecure primarily because there's a high imports of foods and world market prices are expected to increase with respect to rice in particular. Thank you.
The people of Harlem are food insecure. No, That's just a pun. That's just a pun. You are absolutely correct that the prices of food worldwide will increase as a result of the climate conditions all over the world. And we know that our staple rice and other staples, other pulses, will also face price increases. What we're doing is trying to now stress agriculture. Agriculture with a focus on small farmers. Try to get people back into the land, back into farming. Part of the problem was the migration during the many years of wars. Today, the capital city, bursting at its seams, is hosting 1/3 of the population of the country because they all went there for safety. But to get them back, you have to have the incentives. They have to have the land. Land is not enough. They have to have assistance to do farming, tools, seeds, helping them with finding markets. So our agriculture program, in fact, there is a USAID program, as you know, that's now supporting food security through the support for small farmers. Liberia is a member of that, a beneficiary of that program, and we will be stressing that. So it's a problem. You're absolutely right. We're trying to find the solution to it by putting more support into small-scale agriculture.
So, Madam President, one last round of 3, and then you will be invited to give concluding remarks as well. So, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam President. My name is Bruno Mendes, and I'm a third-year student at Columbia College. You mentioned that I'm sorry, I don't get to speak to authorities all the time, so I'm a little bit nervous.
I'm nervous too. So,
you mentioned that it's important for the government to remain as slim as possible and be responsible for main government functions while giving enough space for the private sector to foster effective growth. But I think another widely agreed upon concern of development is inequality. So, given these two factors, what would you say are the most effective ways for the government to foster equitable growth without growing too much, I guess?
Inequality. Yes, there is some of that. You still have in our society the pyramid in which the bottom has most of the people, the poor, and we have to, through equal opportunity, through training, begin to try to close that gap between the haves and the have-nots. I think it's a challenge for all societies, even this one, to be able to promote equality, because there will always be a certain amount of inequality based upon people's chosen path, people's desire, people's giving commitment to education, to training, to working. But as a government, we have a responsibility to make sure that our laws, our policies, our practices provide equal opportunity to all, and for the most vulnerable, ensure that there are social safety nets and transfers to be able to give them an opportunity to live. So it's an ongoing, continuing process of trying to address income inequalities, opportunity inequalities in every society, and ours is no exception.
Good afternoon, Madam President. My name is Mohammed Keita. I'm currently with the Committee to Protect Journalists, and I imagine you can guess the direction of my question. But I wanted to ask, how can your government enhance its support for civil society in Liberia, especially when it comes to human rights defenders, journalists, and others whose work may at times expose the shortfalls of government? I'm specifically talking about when journalists and human rights defenders become threatened, and what the government can do to improve the enforcement of the rule of law and to deliver justice, not only for them, but also for the most vulnerable in Liberia. I was troubled a few months ago to read that a Liberian reporter had to go into hiding because she received little assistance from the police, and she was essentially on her own, only because she had reported about the practice of female genital mutilation. You know, I understand that it's a very politically sensitive topic in Liberia and that it's a widespread practice, especially that is practiced by the powerful secret societies, but I also understand that the government licenses this practice or regulates this practice. So what sorts of resources in terms of capital or political will does your government need in terms of improving its support for the work of journalists, you know, journalists like Maya Zango?
We are proud of Liberia's record on the rule of law and on the promotion of freedoms, freedom of the media, freedom, all freedoms, religion, association, expression. We're the only country to have signed the Freedom of Information Act. We've already attested to the Table Mountain Declaration, and our media is as free as they come, despite the fact that our Constitution says freedom carries with it responsibility. Responsibility for what you do and what you say. But our press is very free. I'll make a pact with you. If you can tell me how we can have a group to protect people from irresponsible media reporting, then we'll be fair in protecting. The Maya Zango story, all she needed to do was to have gone to our Ministry of Justice and say, we have a case of somebody threatening my life. Even if she said, I did not know, we have intelligence. Today we're breaking a case right in Liberia where our intelligence have found people in a phone call trying to take ransom. We would have found that person. But to get on the internet and charge something that you have not substantiated because you want to come to America is a dangerous thing. And so I say our media is free. There's nobody being prosecuted for any freedom of expression or any story. They attack me, they attack officials, they attack ambassadors, sometimes unjustifiably, but there's no recourse against them. But there are some stories that in fact are simply untrue, meant to serve personal purposes. We also need a protection of people who face defamation and false accusation because of personal interests.
Thank you.
May I invite you, Madam President, to have one last question and then make closing remarks?
Good afternoon, Madam President. My name is Chris Van Heist. I'm a post-bac pre-medical student. And my question is, how do you establish a respect for human rights in a country that has developed a culture of impunity? Thank you.
You pass laws, you create institutions to fight that impunity. That's why we have an independent Human Rights Commission where they can take any action against somebody. Impunity is a long-standing thing in our societies and in others. We continue to fight it and address it. You can take anybody to court. We encourage it. We encourage it through our private lawyers, or through we do have public defenders. to help those who don't have the means to be able to hire their lawyers. Our Ministry of Justice, the minister herself, is a sort of a human rights activist herself, you know. In her days of teaching in this place, she has the same mindset like you. So you can be sure that she's going to protect the rights of people. So we just have to develop the laws, the policies, the institutions, and there's something to be able to fight the impunity.
Thank you.
Can I do more?
Yeah, one more. Yes, one more.
No, I wanted him to know. Maybe he could tell me what else I can do to fight him. All right. Anyway.
Okay, just one more. Yeah. Your Excellency, thank you so much for coming here and taking questions from the audience. My name is Alaji Sanyang and I'm from Gambia. My question is more of a sub-regional question regarding West Africa. Again, I'm from Gambia, and Gambia, like in most other West African countries, there is no democracy. And we have a head of state that just recently executed 9 prisoners. And so most of the audience here have heard it on the news. And my question to you is, what will you tell Gambians and other people in West Africa who are living in an oppressing, a government that is oppressing them? What will be your message if you have to go to Gambia today and to uplift them? What will you tell them?
We have our regional protocols. The Economic Community of West African States have protocols to which all of us have subscribed regarding the protection of the rights of the individual, regarding democracy. Some will respect it fully, maybe some will not respect it fully, but those are the protocols, and we go to our regional meetings and we talk about those protocols, and we urge all member states to make sure that they subscribe to that. And when there's a major departure, as in the case of Mali, attempting to take us back to the days of coup d'etat, our position on that was very firm and very strong, that anyone that violates the rights of others will not have the same rights in our community. So that's my response. We'll take it up in our next summit meeting.
Thank you.
Madam President, you've been very generous with us. We would have kept you all evening, and we are sure you would have had the generosity of staying with us. But may I invite you to a couple of concluding remarks, and we will dismiss everybody.
Finish?
Yes.
Oh.
Unfortunately.
I don't mind answering their questions, quite frankly.
I just have one word.
Well,
Can
then.
Thank you.
I am happy to oblige.
Now the
Thank
line
you so
got
much.
longer.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Actually, I have a solution of moral rearmament you mentioned, and I'll mention it at the end of my remark. I remember in one of our interviews you mentioned that what a woman can bring to the process of rebuilding a fragile state is extra sensitivity and more caring comes from the characteristic of being a mother. Taking care of the family, being concerned about the children, and also managing the home. I've seen Liberian women have been playing a very extremely significant role ever since the beginning of peace process. And what I want to say is that half a world away, a very precious mother named Zhang Gyuja started a movement of spreading mother's love, and she spared nothing to help people around her and devoted everything without expecting anything in return. And her effort throughout the decades inspired millions of youth across the globe to devote themselves to help people around them. And you yourself is a mother, and like we all have seen you successfully managing your own household and Liberia as a nation. So, and you have this mandatory program sending all the children to school, and you also integrate the former opposition parties into your cabinets, which is phenomenal. So actually this reminds me of one paragraph in the Bible
1 Corinthians chapter 13. If you replace the love with mother, it makes perfect sense. I will just read it really quick. Mother keeps no record of wrongs. Mother does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Mother always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Mother never fails. So,
I couldn't agree with you more.
so in my opinion, mother's love is the solution of moral rearmament, because only a mother can unconditionally sacrificing herself for other people, only for the benefit of people around her. And this is a message I want to deliver from Jangyu Janim. She's a chairwoman of International We Love You Foundation. And my name is Xiuhan Hu. I'm from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences in Columbia. I'm a human rights major. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Like I say, I agree with you completely. Everything you say, you're so right.
Shall we consider that this is an excellent counterpoint to hope, Madam President?
Can we do two last one? I'll let you select who does it.
Indeed, it is. So we will have two last questions, please.
Thank you so much. Madam President, it's an honor to be here today and to hear you. My name is Frida Yawson. I am a student at the School of International and Public Affairs. I am also part of the SIPA Pan-African Network. I love to hear you say that we are looking long-term. You're looking at a 2030 agenda. And one of the things that concerns us, and we're having an upcoming diplomatic forum in November, is statecraft. And I think you are almost an epitome of how to do that well. But looking long term, what strategically are you doing to position Liberia on the international stage as a middle income country? What are you doing to put Liberia at a place where it is able to receive the resources that are coming in and use it as a leverage for its people? So there's a lot of foreign direct investment, I hear you say, but how are you going to translate that, and how are you going to put Liberia on the stage and prepare it to become a middle income country?
All the many things that I mentioned, building capacity through education and training, building the institutions, ensuring that our laws, our policies, our strategies, all not only strengthen growth, but growth with equity, sustainable development. Those are all part of that agenda. The details are carried in our new vision. I mentioned only the broad objective, but the details are backed up by all of these programs.
I'm sorry, I meant in your interactions on the international stage with other world leaders. For instance, we know there are no African countries in the OECD. So as you are making those rounds in the international stage, how do you prepare Liberia?
I think we're there already. You don't think so?
I'll leave that to you.
I think Liberia was just chosen as one of the, it was mentioned by the President, one of the three countries. I represent Liberia that will be formulating the successor regime to the Millennium Development Goals, what we call the post-2015 development agenda. I think that in itself is a recognition of the role we will play in the world, and so I think in that respect we're already there in our region. We're known to be one of the leaders supportive of the transformation, economic transformation, the democratic process. So we'll try to meet your expectations.
Your Excellency, it's an honor to address you and also pose the last question of this afternoon. My name is Nikolai. I'm studying a master's program in climate and society here at Columbia. My question is in relation to your new position on the UN Secretary General's high-level advisory board for the post-2015 International Development Agenda. It would be very interesting to hear your perspective on how important the Millennium Development Goals have really been for progress and transition in Liberia, And also, your views on the role of sustainable development targets in the post-2015 agenda, given the Rio Plus 20 summit and discussion that were made there, where one did not reach a set of sustainable development goals, as many had hoped. So both personal reflections and those of the high-level advisory group when you convened here in New York would be very interesting. Thank you.
Because the MDGs were formulated without widespread people consultation and participation, it was only in the latter years that countries began to really focus on it, particularly countries in Africa where the capacity is limited, whether the lack of statistics and data to be able to measure performance are insufficient. That's why today the MDGs are just 3 years from coming to the final point. Many of our countries are not going to meet all the goals. One or two will meet some of them, but in terms of all 8 goals being met by all of our countries, that's not going to happen, and we know it. The post-2015 group, first of all, has to look at the MDGs. What's the progress to date? What has been the reason why many countries have not been able to meet them? How can we accelerate the effort in the next 3 years so we don't take our eye off the MDG ball, but we try to accelerate to see as many as can go through and achieve as many of them as possible. But then the 2015, we don't want to repeat the same mistake by making sure this one indeed is a robust consultative process. And that means forming groups that are getting civil society involved, making sure that there are workshops, that regional institutions will incorporate a discussion on the post-2015, that Rio Plus 20 on the Sustainable Development Goals have to be taken into account, that G7 Plus, which involve fragile states, and the New Deal will have to be taken into account. So that process is on, and at the end of the day, it is hoped that the new agenda will reflect it. There are some emerging consensus around certain things like the continuation of the fight against poverty, ensuring women's empowerment, education, introducing new things such as youth development, addressing climate change. All of those are things that are now being debated and discussed, but there is no agenda yet. That agenda still has to come after a consultation, global consultation, in which we can see where the threads of consensus and community of effort begins to come together, and that will not happen. The time frame is short. We have to present a report to the Secretary General by June next year, so he presents it to the General Assembly in September. But the commitment to make it come from the wishes of the people is strong, and I hope that it can be done. My concluding remarks is I started at 7:30 this morning with a meeting with philanthropists. I moved on to a meeting on rural women empowerment. I went on to the Corporate Council on Africa to talk about investment and growth. And I'm now here with you, and I'll ask you to please let me go home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats as we escort the speaker out of the building. Please remain in your seats. Thank you.